Mm-hmm. Hey, listen. This never happens. Never happens. Where I'm trying to explain something and then the camera just stopped like that. And do you know, every time I've had this conversation today with a friend or talking about what I'm seeing, our phone calls drop or this stops. I'm not one of those people that believes that the devil is after you, and I don't think I'm that important to him. But I do know that these videos have a tendency to say things and expose the enemy in ways that is no bueno for him. So let's try this one more time. There is a question, right? There's a question that Peter asked Jesus that I believe exposes all Christians, you and I, in some way, shape, or form. And maybe in the most detrimental shape possible. So let's try this again. First things first. Welcome to CNN. I'm Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. I apologize for the people who were watching the last live stream. Oh, how coincidental that was that just cut off. May happen again, but we persevere in the Lord, right? So there's a question that many people have read, if you've read the Gospels. It's a question that Peter asked Jesus. And this question, I believe, exposes the majority, if not all, Christians. All right? So let's look at the question that Peter asked Jesus. We're going to look at Jesus' response, and we're going to talk about, well, how does this expose us? What is Peter really asking Jesus? Here we go. Let's pray that the Lord doesn't allow this to get stopped again. All right? So Peter asked a question. Now remember this. Keep in mind that Peter has been walking with Jesus for years. He's heard teaching. He's seen Jesus do all of these things. On one level, this question should have been a no-brainer because he's heard Jesus teach on this topic. He's seen Jesus do things that are connected to this topic. And the Gospel of John tells us that many things that Jesus said and did are not written in the books. Because he said all the books in the world could not contain the stuff that Jesus said and did. So we don't even have everything that Jesus said and did. The apostles, the disciples, spent 3 years with him. They heard and saw everything. All right. So when Peter asks this question, he's asking this question on the latter half of Jesus's life, having understood a lot of what Jesus taught already. But I don't think he was asking this question just for us. I think he was exposing, or just for him, I think he was exposing all of us. So here's the question that Peter asked Jesus. All right. Matthew 18:21. Here's what it says. Then Peter came up to him and said, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Okay, let's read the question again. How often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times. All right. Keep in mind a couple things. One, forgiveness, forgiving other people, forgiveness is the foundation of Christianity. There are 2 pillars of Christianity, love and forgiveness. If you are not loving and you do not forgive people, then you are not a believer. You will not be. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but this is clearly 2 things in the Bible. Forgiving other people is one of the chief ways we imitate the Lord, because the foundation of Christianity and the foundation of our relationship with God is that we've been forgiven, right? So forgiveness is fundamental. It's just, you have to do this. Peter's been walking with Jesus for years, and he knows this. Now, keep in mind, when he asked, should I forgive him 7 times? What they were taught, the Jews were taught in that day and age, that you only had to forgive someone 3 times in order to keep the standard of God. After that, you don't have to forgive him anymore. So when Peter says, do I have to forgive 7, as many as 7 times? Peter was being a better, good person than what the average Jew was required to give, at least what they thought they had to give, right? But keep in mind, Peter has been walking with Jesus and has heard him teach on forgiveness, have seen him take to the paralytic, Get up, take up your mat. Your sins have been forgiven, right? He's seeing the uproar of like, who can forgive sins but God alone? He's been around this. So Peter asks this question. It's a crazy question. Here's the question. How often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? So why does this expose all Christians? What is this pointing out? Here's the thing that we have to realize. What is Peter really asking Jesus? Now, here's the question. How often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Seems like a good question, but there's something else going on. So let's see what Peter's really asking, right? Let's try to understand the implications of what he's saying. Keep in mind that Peter has been schooled by Jesus on forgiveness. He should know the answer to this question. So the question is, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times, right? That's what he's asking. But here's what's really going on. And if you just paraphrase the question a little bit, listen to what Peter's asking, all right? This is what Peter's saying. How many times do I have to be godly? Because to forgive people is to imitate God, right? How many times do I have to be godly in my response to someone if I'm being repeatedly sinned against by them? So Peter's asking, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? How often do I have to be godly? How often do I have to imitate you? How often do I have to be obedient and forgive people who continue to sin against me? 7 times? Right? This is what Peter's getting at. How often do I have to forgive? Here's another way to look at the question. Can there be a limit to my obedience if there's no limit to their disobedience? I know it says of, you know what I'm saying, but we got to excuse me. Is we doing this on a part-time. I'm going to fix this right now. But Peter's asking, can there be a limit to my forgiveness if there's no limit to their sinfulness? Is there a limit to how much I have to obey if people don't have a limit to how much they disobey? In other words, am I allowed to not forgive if they keep sinning against me? This is what Peter's really getting at. He's asking, can there be a limit to my obedience if there's no limit to their disobedience? Do I have to keep forgiving people, or can I stop at a certain point in time? That's what Peter's really asking when he asked Jesus, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? 7 times? Can there be a limit to my obedience if there's no limit? In other words, do I have to keep forgiving people who sin against me? Am I allowed to not forgive people if they keep sinning against me? This is a serious question. And I think it exposes many Christians, if not all of us in some way, shape, or form. Peter's question is exposing that many believers think that if someone continues to sin against me, right? If they continue to sin against me, I don't have to obey God. I don't have to. There has to be a limit to that. I shouldn't have to keep obeying God and forgiving people. I don't want to imitate God and forgive people who keep sinning against me. This is what Peter's really getting at. There has to be some limit, Lord, that I'm allowed to say, okay, enough is enough. You cannot sin against me and keep being forgiven by me. This is what Peter's really asking. How often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? He's getting at a really deep issue that I think exposes everyone that's watching live and everyone that's watching later, including me. He's exposing that many of us believe, or at least think, that our forgiveness, that God is allowing us or may allow us to not have to be obedient to him and forgive others and treat others opposite of the way they may treat us if they continue to sin against us. Why is this important for all professing believers to realize? Here's why. Because if my obedience to God, if your obedience to God is connected to people's obedience to me, like if you don't treat me a certain way, then I'm not going to obey God and treat you. If you don't love me, then I'm not going to be loving towards you. This is what Peter's really asking. Am I allowed to not imitate you, because that's what, remember, I did a couple of videos back. You can find it on the Kurt's Corner playlist. Christianity in America has been reduced to just being a better good person than someone else. It's not about imitating Jesus. It's about being a better good person. That's what Christianity is. This is why you can say you're a Christian and be crazy and people will still say you're a Christian, even though the majority of the fruit in your life is divisive, it's arrogant, it's sinful judgment, it's gossip, it's slander, and people will stand by you because as long as you're a better good person than the people you're talking about, then people think that's what Christianity is, and that's not what it is. Christianity is about obeying Jesus, imitating Jesus, right? And forgiveness is about imitating God because we've experienced that forgiveness. Peter's question is exposing that many believers think that if people continue to sin against them, that they don't have to continue forgiving, right? If you think, okay, if they keep sinning against me, then I don't have to forgive them, then your obedience to God when you do forgive is really not about obeying him. It's about making them change. Do you get what I'm saying? Our obedience then is not really trying to honor God, but is trying to make these people, whoever you are, stop dishonoring me. So because when you're trying to honor the Lord and you're trying to imitate Jesus, the focus is not about how much you've been sinned against, right? And this is what Jesus is going to push back on Peter that we're going to look at in a second. The focus is not on how much you sin against me. When you're trying to imitate God and trying to honor the Lord, when Jesus is the standard and not being a better good person than someone else, then the focus is not on how often you sin against me. It's how often I sin against the Lord. I want to honor the Lord regardless. In other words, for a Christian, your obedience to God is not contingent upon the way people treat you. It's contingent upon the way what God has done for you, not how people treat you. It's not. So if someone is a perpetual, I don't care if it's a family member, a spouse, if someone is a perpetually evil towards you, Jesus does not say, you will not find a credible translation that says, if they continue to sin against you, you may have your way with them, right? That's not how it works, because that's the easy way out. To imitate Jesus, we forgive people. We obey him despite the fact that we don't feel like it, that we feel like we're being attacked. And that's the real issue. We don't obey God because we want people to change. We obey God because we've changed. We're changing. And what happens is, if I'm only going to forgive or treat you a certain way, to make you stop treating me this way, then my obedience is not about honoring him. It's not about me changing. It's about trying to change you. So then that obedience is selfish ambition. I hope this makes sense, because this is a good scheme of the devil that has a lot of people that we think that, hey man, do I have to keep forgiving this person? So then we get into, well, what is forgiveness? And we're trying to figure out what the line is. And I get it. It can be confusing, but forgiveness is simply, I'm not going to treat people as their sins deserve. It's Romans 12. I'm not going to repay anyone evil for evil. It doesn't mean that you're still best friends. Forgiveness does not mean you act like they never did anything. Forgiveness does not mean, and it's tough when you live with someone who continually hurts you. But what you're doing is trying to imitate Jesus and demonstrating as best as you can the fruits of the Spirit towards them. We don't get to say, all right, you've crossed the line. You've crossed it. Here's proof of this. Here's Jesus' response to Peter. Here's his initial response. So here's Peter's question. Let's look at this one more time. Here's Peter's question. Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Again, what Peter is saying is, can there be a limit to my obedience if there's no limit to their disobedience? So Peter was like, look, after 7 times, is it okay to no longer be godly towards them and imitate and forgive them? And here's what Jesus says back. Jesus says this, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Now, for those of you who are super literalists or really, really petty, Jesus doesn't mean 77 times. And I'm saying this because there are probably a few of you that are like, well, shoot, my spouse is on 75. Like, that's not what Jesus is talking about. His point was you don't keep count. You continually forgive. And the point is this. Here's the reason why Jesus says this, and he proves it in the rest of the parable in the unmerciful servant. This is Jesus's point by this answer and then the parable that he gives after. In fact, you know what? Let's do this. Let's do this. Do you want to see the parable? Let's read the parable together, all right? I was ready for this. I was ready. I wanted that smoke. Let's read this parable together, all right? Let's look at this. Let's look at this parable up close and personal. Let's get to it, all right? I'm going to move down here so y'all really get that smoke. All right, let's look at this parable. Here's what Jesus said in response. If you can't read it, then zoom in. Trust me, I'm not lying. This is what Jesus says. All right, here we go. Beginning in verse 21. Then Peter came up to Jesus and said, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. That's like $1 billion today. That's crazy money. Like no one could ever pay 10,000 talents. That's like $1 billion today. And since he could not pay, his master offered him up to be sold, and his wife and his children and all that he had, and payment to be made. So the servant fell to his knees, imploring him, have patience with me, and I will pay you everything. And out of pity for him, the master of that servant released him and forgave him the debt. So you owe $1 billion. Out of mercy for you, I'm going to forgive the debt. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. That's like $500, right? Couple weeks' wages, a denarii, right? Couple hundred denarii, couple months' wages versus $1 billion. And seizing him, he began to choke him, saying, pay what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down and pleaded with him, have patience with me and I will pay you. Same thing he said to the other guy, to the master who he owed $1 billion to, have patience and I'll pay you. And God said the same thing. And here's what he said to him. He refused and went and put him in prison until he should pay the debt. When his fellow servants saw that what had taken place, they were greatly distressed, and they went and reported to their master all that had taken place. Then his master summoned him and said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. And should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had had mercy on you? And in anger, his master delivered him to the jailers until he should pay all his debt. So also my heavenly Father will do to every one of you if you do not forgive from your heart. Whoo-wee! Wow. Jesus is not playing. He said, I'm going to do this to you if you don't forgive from your heart. So what's Jesus's point? Here's Jesus's point. You've sinned against God and were forgiven way more than you've been sinned against. That's Jesus's main point. That's his main point. You've sinned against God and have been forgiven way more than you've been sinned against. And to keep in mind that forgiving others is one of the clearest ways that we imitate Jesus. We don't imitate Jesus by calling people out. In fact, you know what? That's a different video. But if you look at Jesus didn't call out the Pharisees. They came for Jesus and he responded. You don't see Jesus didn't call the Romans. He didn't call anybody. He taught how to love, imitate, and obey the Lord, to obey God. That's what he taught. When people came at him, he responded. But he wasn't chasing everybody. He wasn't picking fights with the Pharisees. They happened to be in the temple when he would do stuff or be in the crowd, and they got offended and they would ask questions or try to trip him up. Forgiving others is one of the clearest ways that we imitate Jesus. That's why Jesus says, if you do not do this, you will not be forgiven. Matthew 6, after teaching the disciples how to pray, here's what Jesus says. For if you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Here's what Jesus is saying. If you do not imitate God and forgive others, then God will imitate you and not forgive. He'll be unforgiving just like you are. If you don't imitate God and forgive others, if you don't try to obey God and forgive others, and that's just one category, then God is going to imitate you and not forgive. But you're going to be the one that's not forgiven. I will be the one that's not forgiven. This is a crazy reality because in all seriousness, I know a lot of believers who just feel like, look, man, I've just been sinned against and that's it. Like, that's a wrap. And don't get me wrong, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that forgiveness means, and it's not, forgiveness is the context for this story. But the reality is imitating God is about, when you want to imitate God, when you want to be godly, you're worried about, like, am I obeying God? Not, am I a better good person than this person? I can tell you, this is going to be a separate video, but I'm just going to say this right now. I've seen many interpersonal relationships destroyed. Let me tell you why. This will be a different video, but let me give you a snapshot. You ever had somebody correct you or you correct them? And the first thing they say is, well, what about you? Like, you do the same thing too, or you do this. And they immediately respond like that, right? And then you end up fighting over who does what. What do you think is happening in that moment? When someone comes to you, your spouse, let's say, or co-worker, sibling, whatever, interpersonal relations close, and they say to you, they bring a correction to you, and you immediately say, well, you do it too. What do you think this happens? Why don't people say, oh man, if you're right, I probably dishonored the Lord? Like, you're not thinking about, because the standard is supposed to be God. You know why you say, well, you did it too. You do it too. Look at what you do. It's because you have also believed that the standard of Christianity is being a better good person. And when that person brings correction to you, they're telling you you're not a good person because you did this. You immediately think, well, I'm a better good person than you. Look at what you do. You do the same stuff too, or you do this. It's almost like you're saying, well, you're a hypocrite for correcting me because you sin too. But that's not how we're supposed to process. The standard is Jesus. So, and let's be honest, we're all far worse than whatever correction we get from anyone anyway. This is why Christianity in America has been obliterated, because it's been reduced to being a better good person. And if I'm a better good person than you, I'll forgive you up to a point, but I don't have to forgive you beyond a point because I've already proven I'm a better good person than you by forgiving you anyway. So let me end with this, because I felt this way before. I'm guilty as charged, what I'm about to say. We are not doing God a favor by going to church, by giving money to the church, by serving, by resisting temptation, by forgiving other people, by obeying. We're not doing God a favor. God is doing us a service by giving us the kind of spirit that would want us to imitate him, so that we demonstrate that we do love him, that we do trust him, and we have eternity to spend time with him. I know people who act like they're doing God a favor. Fam, you're doing the devil a favor by thinking like that. The reality is, Peter's question exposes all of us. How often must I forgive if my brother sins against me? He's saying, how often do I have to be godly in my response to someone if I'm repeatedly being sinned against by them? He's saying, can there be a limit to my obedience if there's no limit to their disobedience? Am I allowed to not forgive someone if they keep sinning against me? And Jesus' answer is simply, no, we're not. We're not allowed. And you know why? Because if God forgave others like you do, like I do, would you be forgiven by him? Should you be forgiven by him? Probably not, fam. Probably not. So we want to imitate God. The standard is vertical. It's not horizontal. When someone brings something to you, they may be wrong. They may even say it wrong. But try to train yourself to be like, all right, like remember the disciples? This is my real closing. I promise. I know you're tired of me right now, but you clicked on the channel. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Remember when Jesus told the disciples, one of you will betray me? I have thoughts about why he said that. I have no idea why he said it. The Bible doesn't say, but I have thoughts about why he said that. But remember their response. This is what I think modern Christianity is like. If Jesus would have said, in your small group, one of you will betray me, the majority of people in your small group would be thinking like, oh, it's probably Bob, because I've seen him do a lot of questionable stuff anyway. No, it's probably Stephanie. Look at how she dressed. Like, she comes to church like she's dating a new guy every couple months. She's not really what. It's probably, that's how most of us would think. But you know what the disciples said? Is it I, Lord? Is it I? They were more worried about if they're the ones that are going to betray Jesus. They even asked John, like, hey, ask him, is it? They didn't say, I bet you it's Judas. That dude is always tripping. They didn't even know who it was. And I don't think it was because Judas was so well disguised, partly, but it was also because they were so aware of themselves and they wanted to make sure they weren't dishonoring to the Lord. That's how you and I need to be. That's how I need to be. Is it me, Lord? Is it I? I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Kirk Kennedy, signing off.